telling that story succinctly in a deck is a skill in itself. That was the biggest. I'm surprised I didn't mention it actually, because my first 6 months I actually struggled with it because it's like you're not used to. It's mostly verbose or mostly just mails. But going into a meeting, using these decks, slides, and actually trying to get your point across very succinctly, that is probably the one of the toughest arts that I had to learn very quickly, because you end up doing the day to day after that.
Welcome to Product Unfiltered. Today we have a special guest with us, Sudha Iyer. Sudha is a principal product manager at Commvault, bringing over 15 years of expertise in leading enterprise data management products. But that's not all. She has also been a founder of Kettle Chai, a startup that captured the heart of tea lovers. In this episode, we'll gain valuable insights from Sudha on the ever evolving landscape of product management. We'll explore her remarkable journey from an engineering manager to a product manager and discover how she skillfully balanced her pivotal role at Commvault with her entrepreneurial endeavors with Kettle Chai. Thank you so much, Sudha, for joining in on this episode. We're really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Utkarsh and Rahul, for having me over on this. I think this is a very unique idea, and looking forward to chatting with you folks.
Yeah, and so that before we actually transition into all things product management, we would love to gain some insights on your journey to being a product manager. How did it started? What were some experiences? Could you share with our listeners?
So I would almost call myself an accidental product manager. I don't know if you know, there's a very popular group on LinkedIn called Accidental Product Manager. So I
Yeah.
truly believe that I'm an accidental product manager because my background is pure engineering, and I had been an engineer and an engineering manager for quite some time. When I decided to actually take a break, just to the world was changing at that point. A lot of cloud, a lot of things were happening. So I really wanted to like stop, take a break, and see, where's the next part of my journey. And I happened to, at that point, a lot of personal stuff happening, and I had this idea that what, the Bay Area needs a chai business. So I don't know how that idea came to me, but I've always been thinking about, since I was a child, just been thinking about ideas around, hey, this makes sense. I wish we had this. Never really took anything to fruition at that point, but this time, because I had the money, I had the resources, I had the time. More importantly, I decided that let's start off on this chai startup. Um, so started this chai business, and I wasn't even aware there was something of product management, honestly, at that point. But when I started off, so as a business owner, I ran it single-handedly, of course, with help from friends and family. But the single business owner, right? So you have to do everything. You have to do sales, you have to do marketing, you have to do your website design, you have to actually create the product, make sure that the product actually is enjoyed by your customers, right? And who are your customers? Where should you go sell this? How do you price it? So literally, I'm walking you through what a product manager does day to day. I was doing all this without knowing that there is a role called product management. So I did this for quite some time, and then COVID hit. So I had to pivot very quickly from an actual live product to start selling it online. I pivoted to taking chai classes online, talking to people. So you had to pivot to do sales online, marketing online, everything that I should actually go door to door, company to company and do it. So I started doing all that. So after doing this for a couple of years, I actually got a call back from my former manager, and he said, "Hey, we're starting this, product management division, and you seem to have a flair for it, since you've run your own company for so long. So why don't you come and join us?" And because of COVID, business was also slowing down. There was no visibility into when the pandemic would end. And living in the Bay Area, you need money. It's not easy to run your own business without scale. And during COVID, there's no easy way to scale because there aren't people around you, right? It's not an easy. Anyone who's tried to do something during COVID would, appreciate what I'm saying. So it just seemed like a natural transition to say, hey, okay, I'm curious. Let's see what this is. He said it's like running your own business, but for a particular product within a company. So I said, okay, that looks like something that it comes to me. So I went back to work. I did continue running my company also on the side over the weekends. And then when I actually transitioned into product management, a lot of it is what I actually did for my business. A lot of it is also different because now you're in a corporate setting. You're not per se your own master as much as you are when you run your own business. But a lot of things that I did over the, when I was running that's exactly the same skills translated to the PM role. So I was pretty happy actually, and that was my journey, right? It's like an accidental PM. No thought about it. If I would probably have just continued running my business and thought of other ways to scale it, if I hadn't chanced upon this opportunity. So yeah, that was the short, long answer.
But Sudha, we'd also want to know. So you started as a software engineer. So what motivated you, or what drove you to enter into the cloud data management space? Because you have been with Commvault for a very long time now. So we would want to know what made you start your career with this industry.
So straight out of college, actually, I was recruited to do. I was with another company, and I was actually working on storage, like the storage layer. That time storage was, even now storage is big, like it's the backbone, right, of anything that you do. You need to have solid storage behind it. So I actually started off in storage, but then I wanted to actually explore um, data management. Just happened, like Commvault just happened in the sense that I was trying to move to the US, so I got a job in Commvault. And from storage I moved one layer up, which is how do you manage your data residing on the storage. And then as the market moves, right, naturally every company who's interested in staying viable, who's staying relevant in their times, this transition will happen. Where the market goes, that's where most companies will go. So of course, cloud was the next thing. But one thing that I did do within my career, even though I've been with the same company for a long time, I've actually worked on many different areas, right? It's not just the one thing that I stuck to. So I've done a lot of cross-functional work. Again, skills that I built over the years as an engineering manager, all those skills I use today because every 3 to 4 years I used to work on a new product, work with different teams, new teams. So all those skills which unconsciously, you're building up over the course of your career. So so cloud is a natural transition, right? Like I said, any company wants to be relevant has to work on cloud, and that's where your customers go. You will go there. So
Yeah,
that's how that started.
so that I have one question around this. Absolutely, you very rightly mentioned that any company who wants to be in the online business needs to transition in the cloud in the modern day. But what was the perspective 15 years before before the present times? Was it the very same thing that people had thought about cloud being such a big thing? Or was it something which was speculated at as, yes, this could be something big, but yes, companies were skeptical around it. The reason I'm asking this thing is because right now, a lot of speculations are being made on things like AR, VR, or artificial intelligence, but we don't know if that will actually shoot up the way cloud has done in the past few years. So you have been in this industry for so long and you have seen that transition. So I would love to share your insights on this.
So honestly, enterprises don't, at that point, right, when cloud started happening and it was a thing, uh, not everyone was willing to move up, mostly because of sovereignty issues, privacy issues, security issues, especially when it comes to your data. If you are, not everyone is comfortable landing your data into a cloud provider. There is a security risk to it. There are compliance risks to it. Even today, we deal in some areas in the world where people are not comfortable. These are sovereign countries, right? They are not comfortable. So even today in those countries, they will not use the public cloud. They will actually end up creating their own private cloud where everything is on their own data center. And it's a cloud-like experience, but it's not a public cloud experience. Right. So to answer your question, Utkarsh, 15 years ago, no, there were skeptics. It wasn't easy. In fact, we ourselves, it takes some time to figure out the strategy, even within a company, right? To say, hey, what are we doing with this? Same thing with your AR, VR, or AI. That's where we are with all these technologies today. Every person is trying to figure out, hey, how should I bring value to what I'm building with these new technologies? And that's exactly what happened even when the cloud started off. It took a couple of years, I think. And then as you start hearing more and more people saying, hey, you know what, maybe my non-critical data will move to the cloud first. And then as the cloud providers also got better, the security practices got better, it just made more sense because you see the value of capex versus opex. You're not spending so much money on your own hardware infrastructure. You are actually, you buy as you want, right? You build you're built for what you use. So it brought in a lot of value, and that's when the transition really became easy. That now everything is cloud, everything. Like, be it, we still do a lot of on-prem stuff because we have huge enterprise customers who are still not willing to really move. Or actually today the world is a hybrid cloud. At least the space that I deal with, it's hybrid. It's people have stuff on-prem, they also have stuff in the cloud. So you have to cater to both. But yes, it's undeniable that you have to have cloud presence. So initially there is some, you figure it out. Will it work? Is it giving me the value that I want? But then now everyone's, onto the cloud bandwagon. So yeah.
Yeah, since we're talking in the cloud space, maybe it would be good for our listeners also to understand it in a better manner. So that if you can break down the whole discussion which we had. So for example, if you can help us listeners understand what is cloud and maybe the three broader criteria, what is public, private, and hybrid. A very quick summary of it, maybe that would help for our listeners in the podcast further also to understand what we are discussing on.
So I'm going to, I was trying to explain cloud to my kids last week. So I'm going to, I think I'm going to use the same, the way I explained it to them. So when we first started off, each one of us had a computer at home, right? And whatever, let's say I take photographs, I had to transfer those photographs into something called a hard disk into my computer and store that. Now, if anything happens to that computer, unless you've made a copy of your data somewhere else, you pretty much lost your data. So I have to think about which computer to buy, how much, how long is the longevity of this, maintain that computer, pay the electricity bill, all that, right? So, and it always has to be on for me to work. I cannot access it remotely a lot of times, right? So cloud in the simplest terms is you take a bunch of computers, bunch of storage, bunch of everything that you need to do your work, and it's maintained by one or more enterprises. They allow you a way to access it. They make sure your data is secure. So very simple example is Gmail, or Google Drive. Google Drive actually is a better example because mail was always somehow very cloudy. But if you take Google Drive, for example, right, we used to work on Word docs on our laptops or our desktops. Today, you can go to Google Drive, work on Gdocs, which essentially is it gives you an interface where you work, your data gets saved. You actually don't know where your data is getting saved. You just have a way to access the data. You have the address to the data, but you don't know where it's going, honestly, right? So that's where the cloud is. So the cloud is a common shared resources, which anyone in the world can, with the proper access, with the proper security, you access, and you pay it like your electricity bill. That's the bigger difference, right? Instead of you paying for a laptop or a computer upfront and the storage, and then you say, hey, I've run out of storage, so now I have to buy more storage. Again, you go to a vendor, you buy. Instead of that, what you do is, it's like a tap. If you want more storage, you can just open the tap a little bit more, you'll get more storage, that kind of thing. But you end up paying for it. It's like an electric. So that's the public cloud. Hybrid cloud is, I take the same set of, say, I group a bunch of hardware together, and I give you a way to access it, but my own team is maintaining it. I still have to worry about hardware. I still have to worry about scaling it, all that. But for many, many reasons, a lot of enterprises used to have it and hence continue to have it. But for other reasons, like I already mentioned, like sovereignty, they're not very comfortable with the public cloud. They build their own cloud kind of infrastructure. So that's your private cloud. Hybrid is, I have resources in my data center, physical resources, but I also end up, let's say, classic example, and I'll give you a backup example because that's the world I come from, is I back this data up into a resource into the cloud. So in case of a disaster, I can still restore that data back as quickly as possible from a cloud provider. So that's hybrid cloud for you. And most enterprises that we see today prefer a hybrid cloud method. They have some sense of autonomy. The data is also closer to you when a disaster occurs. So you can get your data back from your data center itself. But in the worst case, you go to, so there are many ways, depending on what your use case is. So that's hybrid cloud, where you have presence both data center as well as in the cloud.
Well, thank you so much for breaking it down so that now listeners will have context. So whatever we discuss about, but we'd also want to deep dive a bit into your entrepreneurial journey. How did it start? Because being in corporate, it's a general notion that since the money keeps flowing every month, it becomes very hard for people to break down from it and actually enter into the entrepreneurship side of it. So maybe if you can talk about your initial days, how did you transition into your startup, and what was that push which was asking you, okay, leave the corporate job and move to your own business now?
I think it was just more of, I've done this for so long. What now, right? Yes, I could have, entrepreneurship wasn't really, it was more of, like I said, I used to keep having these ideas, but I never took it to fruition. And then because I decided to take a break, and because I worked for so long, I had some money saved, which is a big factor. Also, unless you're going for funding and things like that, which honestly I wasn't, because this was more of, let me try it and see if it works, right? So um, it just seemed very exciting, and it was like, if you look around, now there are companies similar to mine. I don't know if they're still surviving though. There were one or two at that time. It was more of love for chai, honestly. I just love drinking chai, and when you go out, there was just no good. The chai lattes just didn't do it for me. So I was like, hey, this could be something that people are looking for. It was more of this came from a more of a passion thing, right? Which is what most, I think, companies start off as a personal passion, and then you say, oh wow, this actually, I mean, of course, personal passion, but it's also, you should have a market for it, right? So leaving the corporate job, honestly, I think after a point, if you all, everyone has this, okay, you'll have these you'll have these troughs where you're like, okay, what am I doing? I don't know, I'm just being very honest, okay? No filtering around this. So you're like, okay, should I upskill myself in the product that I'm working on? Should I switch? None of these are easy, but at that time, taking a break was the easy part for me, because I was like, I'm really exhausted. Very intense work environment as well. So I'm exhausted. I want to take a break. So while on a break, your brain frees up. And you're like, hey, this is a great idea. So that was the way I started off. And I've always been interested in, hey, I don't know if you remember, Philips had this, was it Philips or Sony? Sorry. The photo thing, you have a frame, it's an electronic photo frame. I actually had thought of that idea a long time back when I was in India, and there was no electronic around it. I mean, there was no technology to do it. But it was just like, hey, cool, imagine if you had something like that, right? So a lot of such ideas where it's like, wow, it'll be awesome to do this, but never really got down to doing it. But this time I was like, no, let me actually do it and see what happens. So yeah.
So there's a general notion which we hear in the startup space as well as in the product space, that a lot of people tend to have that founder bias for their idea, and we see similar things happening in the product space. When a product manager comes up with some idea, there is a bias towards it. So maybe if you can talk us through that, how did you make sure that that bias never impacted the output of the work which you are trying to do, or what would our listeners be taking into account while they are building products in the future? That biasness is one thing which might be good in certain scenarios, but it's also important to be logical of what you are trying to do. So maybe if you can talk through your example.
So actually, I'll talk more through in the corporate space, not really while running your own business, right? Because that's slightly different, because it's your idea, you are trying to take it to fruition. So the bias is obvious. In fact, you should have a bias, because unless you have that passion, you're not going to take it forward. You have to be a little bullheaded also when you're running your own thing, right? Because you need to see the merit of it and drive it. But in the corporate space, how do you deal with the biases? It has to be backed by data, right? That's where you go do your product market fit. That's where you go talk to customers. You see if your idea actually will bring value, because no matter how passionate you are about your idea in a corporate setting, right? When you're running your own product as a PM, it doesn't make sense if there is no market for it, if it's not going to solve your customer's problem. So that's where the point of doing your due diligence comes in. Yes, I have this fantastic idea, but before I even put more resources behind it, before I go budget for it, I have to go do a product market fit. I have to talk to customers. I have to see if this has at least what is short term, long term strategy for this, right? Um, so bias is will be there, but you should also be honest enough to see what the data is telling you. Once you do your product market fit, you do your due diligence, you should also be willing to pivot, right? And you have to be flexible as a PM. You have to, oh, okay, this didn't work, what is the next thing that I can do?
Yeah.
So that's I at least that's what I used to get over that. Hey, my idea is the best, right? Sure, but does it have any actual practical standing when you go build it out, right? Otherwise, you're just going to end up spending a lot of resources, time, money, and you're not going to see any returns. So,
Yeah, and like so the shifting gears to another segment which we really wanted to dive deep into is your transition from engineering manager to product manager. Like you have been in the industry for so long, you started as a software engineer, rose up the ranks to an engineering manager, and then to a product manager. So would love to first understand the difference between an engineering manager and a product manager, because many PMs working in tech B2B products are being mistaken as engineering managers. So just wanted to learn about what are the key differences between these two roles.
actually, the first 6 months of your transition, at least for me, were the toughest because when you come from an engineering background, your thought process is always, how do I do this? I have a problem. How do I fix it? We rarely focus on why should we even fix this problem? That basic switch of how do I do something, or the fastest way to do something, the most efficient way to do something, to should I even do it? Why should I do it? And what is the best way to do it, not in terms of technology, but what is the best way to do it in terms of the value that you bring to your customer, how you should sell it, is this competitively, is it viable? Those things you rarely, unless you rarely, at least very honestly, when I was an engineering manager, my whole thought process was, what is the most efficient way to solve a problem, right? It's never about, like I said, should I do it? Why should I do it? So I think that's why the PMs, that thinking takes some time to come in. It's difficult, really, honestly. First 6 months were like tough because anything anyone asked me, I say, yeah, let's just do this. Then at least I had a very good mentor in the company who makes you think in that way, which says, does this make sense? Just say no. Oh, saying no, by the way, is very difficult. As an engineering manager, you're used to saying yes because you are just given a problem, right? You're like, yes, we can do it. It's always a challenge for you as an engineering manager. You're saying, how can I use my brain to fix this problem? So that mindset, that shift in thinking takes some time. So that's the biggest, from how to why. And I'm starting questions about why all the time. It's all about the why, right? Like the how actually comes last. It's like why? Why should I build? Why should I license it like this? Why should this? It's that why takes some time. At least in my case, I mean, all this is personal, right? People have different journeys. To me, this was the biggest.
No, that completely makes sense. Because like the why part is the strategic part which a product manager needs to take care of, and how part is that building phase which an engineering manager has to take care of. But so that what are some other differences of between the roles and responsibilities of an engineering manager versus a product manager? Would love to know more about that.
So I think engineering manager, the stakeholders you talk to, are probably just PMs, right? But as a PM, you speak to so many different functions in your company. You speak to sales, you speak to marketing, you speak to engineering, you speak to customers, most importantly. You speak to customer support as well, depending on how big the company. Like in my company, we do all of this as a PM. You speak to all these functions. And everyone has a different, the other big thing is your communication style changes. You can be very, very technical when you're talking to your engineering teams. It's all jargon. It's probably one-liners. Whereas here it's more of context, setting the context for everyone, right? Like, be it customer support, be it your sales guys, your marketing folks. It's all about setting context in very simple, either business terms that they understand or very simple layman terms that anyone would understand. So that's another big change, that who you communicate with is a wider and a very varied audience as compared to what you do as an engineering manager. You have a lot of autonomy also as an engineering manager. You have a lot of, whereas as a product manager you don't, which I think everyone knows is yours. I think the most overused statement is you influence, right? You don't have any authority.
Yeah.
That is very, very true. So most of your time is spent in talking to people. So you have to be very good at communication. As an engineering manager, you can actually get away with, I mean, it's like people just get it because it's all based on technology. Whereas here, you have to be very careful with how you communicate, what you're communicating. That's another big change that I found.
Mm-hmm. Recently I was reading one article by Amy Vora where she talked about budgeting for failure, and I really like that concept that we always budget for success, but we never budget for failure. And maybe that's something which product leaders should take into account for. So would love to hear your perspective on while you're building products as a product leader now, and before that, since you are in engineering side and you are thriving to find success in whatever task being given to you now, do you take into account failures, or how do you while building something new, since we need to test it out, we need to find the why part of it, or should we do it or not? Do you take into account budgeting for failure? Because that looked like a good concept to me to take into account. And I could see that in the corporate space with my internship going on, there are a lot of instances where you try things hard for a long time, but eventually it fails because that might not be the need of the hour. So how, as a product leader, you take these things into account?
So I think whenever you start off anything new, at least the way we do it is there's always a risk involved to it, right? So you have to be cognizant of the risk. So if you're building out something new, a new feature, new product line itself, there is always a risk factor, and you call out the risk factor always. Like at least any good product leader would say, this is the risk factor. And the really good ones actually say, okay, you know what, we're going to try it. It's time bound. They call out what success is, what failure is. And you have to have the gumption to say, no, I'm going to stop this whole, because everyone gets very passionate about what they're building all across, right? Be it the PM who said yes to it, be the engineering manager, the resources. And finally, passion is what drives what you're doing also, right? Day to day, why you turn up at work is because you like what you're doing. So it's difficult, but a good product leader will see the signs. You've already budgeted for the risk already. So when you go do your product market fit, you do your business cases, you know that, this is the risk, and you'll call it out. You'll say, this is what we think will happen. If this doesn't, this is our fallback plan, right? So you'll say, it's usually time bound because you don't want to spend infinite resources on it, your time on it. You don't see a return ROI on what you're doing. You should have the thing to say, no, we stop it now, and then we pivot. So that ability, that agility also has to be there. So does it always work? Not always, but at least what I've seen is that happening more and more now, right? Like in the olden, probably couple of, like what you're saying, right? Some initiatives, you'll continue to work on it for like months, years together sometimes, and you'll never get the fruit of it.
Yeah.
But you need that kind of thought leadership for someone to come and say, you know what, this is not working, let's stop it. It doesn't mean it's a failure for us. It's always a learning process. You learn from this, and the next thing that you build, you will build this risk into it already. So that's how usually that's how we do it usually.
But also it would be interesting for our listeners who are early in their career to understand what is that point where you accept, okay, we need to pivot or we need to transition from what we are trying to do, because maybe these things comes with experience, maybe these things comes with a more logical attitude that, okay, we drove the matrix, okay, this is what success looks like, this is what failure looks like, and looks like we are approaching towards the other part, so we need to stop. But if you can talk a bit more about how should early career people should think of these things while building products, because for me personally, if I'm a new PM and if I'm working on my first product and if it's heading towards failure, the passion part would come in very hard to me, that this is something I started building now and I have to stop it. So how do you deal with that scenario would be a good understanding for listeners.
So, like I said, you've already built that risk, right? You've said that I'm going to do it for a certain time. Is it easy to, you see something failing, is it easy to stop? No, absolutely not. It's not. But you never work in isolation, right? You're working with a team always. You always have these, and I believe in product instinct as well, which, yes, it develops with experience, but all of us have it, right? As humans, all of us have product instinct. So you will know the signs, whether you're going to listen to the signs is where you bounce that off your whoever you're working with. And you'll always have people who have more experience than you in your company, PMs, right? Your own managers. If it's a good manager, everyone fails. Okay, if you don't fail, you're not really taking enough risks. That's all that it means. So if you have a good backing in your company, and you should always have people who can just throw, you know what, this is happening, what do you think, right? You take 2-3 opinions and then you put things in motion. Let's say either you still work, go on putting your efforts into it, or you say, you know what, this is not the time, we have to move to something else. So is it an easy decision? No, especially for a new PM, it's not. In fact, one of my first products, I pursued it like with a dog-headedness, which was finally took my boss took me aside and said, I really don't see, and he was good enough to at least let me pursue it, like try all avenues. It's like when you're swimming, you're just thrown into the water, you're just trying to surf. So he had the thing to say, you know what, I tried all the avenues possible, spoke to customers, made sales calls, did everything. But finally, after a point, you're like, you know what, you have to take a step back and you say, I'm putting in so much effort, is it worth it? Can I use that effort somewhere else? It's not easy, especially first product, it's not easy at all. But that's where you talk to other folks, who have more experience. They've done this multiple times. So you should get their experience, and you have to become a little dispassionate. It takes time, but it comes. After a couple of years, you're like, okay, this is a product. It could be your baby, but remember, you can always create another. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sudha, for sharing all these wonderful insights. In fact, something which I really wanted to ask you in this podcast was how to manage stakeholders. And one of the most important stakeholders which PM manages are engineers. You have been an engineer, you have been an engineering manager, so you know how the work is being done at that part of the lake. So would love to learn 3 key tips which you would like to share with our listeners in the best ways. How can you manage stakeholders that are engineers?
I think the first thing is you have to gain, and again, this is my personal view, right? You have to gain their confidence. And a lot of it is, you may not be from a technical background, but I think you should use the product. You should know every aspect of the product so that you can talk intelligently to them. Do you need to know the technology underneath it? Not really, because like I said, your focus is the why and what. You shouldn't really be totally focused on the how, but you should know enough to be dangerous, right? That's the first thing. So know your product in and out as a user, because that's where the value you're bringing in. Second is communication, of course, right? Engineering leaders are usually very strong folks, right? They have strong personalities. So that's where the communication skill comes in. I think the focus should always remain on what you're trying to do for the customer. And it's important to reiterate that all the time, right? It's not about what you personally think or what your value system is and things like that. All that does come in, but it's the PM's job to really refocus the conversation around customer value. What are you building, right? So communication is very important. Third thing is develop a thick skin. Honestly, it's not easy to work with not just engineering, anyone, right? Because the people have different personalities, so you have to have a very thick skin, and you should have the ability to be resilient and just keep moving ahead. So that some people are born with it, some people you have to learn it, but you have to have a thick skin. You can't just You have to. I mean, no ego. Also, as a PM.
Your third point totally resonated with me. Like having thick skin and being resilient, I could clearly see some flavor of it during internship too, that this is something you need to develop over time, because when you are trying to pursue something, there'll be both the sides of people. There'll be people who will say, oh, why are you even doing this? This will never work out. And there'll be people who will push you to do that thing. So having that thick skin to decide when to do what is very important. But so that we'd also want, so before we move on to the end part of the podcast, we'd also want you to share any example of the product which you have built in the past, and if you can take us through the entire journey, because building products if different industries changes, so we would want to know if you can take any instances. Not necessary you need to name the product, but if you can talk about the journey in terms of how did you start thinking about it, what were the processes involved while building it, and how did you do the entire journey.
So this was actually very early on. One of my first features or products that I was asked to work on. It was a storage solution actually, for built specially for backups in a certain use case. So the first part was to understand. I mean, just overused terms, but product market fit, which actually essentially is what is the value what you're trying to solve, what are you trying to solve, and are there any takers for this product, right? Two pieces of it. So the initial thing was building a business case around why are you building this, who is the customer that you're trying to solve this for, and what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So this is the main three portions. And then, okay, in terms of monetary value, what will you bring in, right? What do you see? How much is the market out there? How much of the market do you think you can capture in the first year? This takes a long time, actually. Just to build out the business case, I think because this was my very first one, it took me like four months to actually get my deck right. And it's not easy because multiple iterations. You have to talk to people. Talking to customers is one part of it. The second is actually building a deck out. And honestly, biggest one thing that I missed when you asked me engineering to this PM, you don't build so many decks as engineers.
Yeah.
Telling that story succinctly in a deck is a skill in itself. That was the biggest. I'm surprised I didn't mention it actually, because my first 6 months I actually struggled with it because it's like you're not used to. It's mostly verbose or mostly just mails. But going into a meeting, using these decks, slides, and actually trying to get your point across very succinctly, that is probably the one of the toughest arts that I had to learn very quickly, because you end up doing the day to day after that.
Yeah.
So building this business case was about all these aspects, right? Like, so you have to do a lot of research for it. You have to actually go talk to customers. You have to do a lot of market analysis. You should analyze the industry itself that you're trying to build this feature out in. So it takes a very long time. It took me like 4 months, I remember, 4 months. And then, so that was the starting point. So once I got the go ahead from upper management saying, okay, this makes sense, then you start talking to your engineers, right? You have to bring everyone on board. You have to say, this is what we're trying to build. You also have a time bound to it, right? Because you have to say, I had to actually line up a couple of customers because it's a brand new product. You have to actually line up a couple of people who said that I would be an early adopter. Now, again, two aspects to it. Are they willing to pay for it? Probably not. So you have to still convince engineering folks that I have these guys. They will be early adopters. We'll use them as early testers. So you set a timeline. And most important for engineering at that point is, yes, you have these 20 features that you can build out for this product. But this is the MVP. This is your first 5. This is the only 5 that I'm looking for. Yes, it may not be elegant, but this is what will bring the most value in the first cut, right? Yeah. So you actually have to define it out very clearly in your plan for execution, and then you go to your engineering. So then we started to work on it. You have to be very, very, at least I believe in being very hands-on for these features which are being developed very new, right? So as and when they develop the feature, you ask for a demo, you install it, you run through it, you figure out certain high-level bugs, right? Of course, testers are doing their job, but from a user perspective, Is it usable? Is it easy
Yeah.
to use? Is it intuitive? So you have to iterate. And at the same time, so this takes some time, right? Building it out takes. At the same time, you still don't want interest to wane. So you have to keep updating your stakeholders saying, hey, this is what we do. This is the milestone we met, right? You keep going back to your customers saying, hey, we're building it out. What more? What more, right? You try to find the customers. So when engineering is building out, you still try to build a market around it. So you're never just sitting back and saying, oh, let me wait for it to come out and then I will go. No, you go out, you still teach more customers, you talk to sales folks, you line up your, of course, the GTM portion is also there, right? At the same time, you're trying to figure out how do I launch it? How should we price this? What makes sense? That's again, you have to do a lot of market analysis of that. So this is while it's getting built, you're doing all the GTM functions around it. How do you launch your product? What makes sense? How do you market it? What's your USP? I mean, of course, the USP, you should have already done that before when you're doing the business case, but now you're actually putting it into action, saying, when we market it, this is what we'll highlight, right? This is what we go to our customers. So you start working with other functions at that point in time. And then when engineering comes out with MVP, you go to those customers who had signed up as early adopters, you talk to them, you actually handhold them through the demos. This is my journey, right?
Yeah,
There are other your SaaS, your cloud-based, these are enterprise products that I'm talking. And this was an on-prem product. It wasn't a cloud-based product. So it's even different. So you actually have to do an install. You have to walk them through the installation process. Things like, so you do demos, you work with them. They come back with early feedback. You make sure you capture it. At the same time, so see, at that point is when you make a decision. Hey, I have early feedback. Should we still continue? What should we do? Right? So you have a time frame. So I mean, that's essentially, so some products really take off, right? So then you end up building your roadmaps, you have a longer term strategy, things like that. At one point you have to stop and say, okay, this is where I reevaluate. Should we scale down? Should we stop it? So that's essentially, I hope I covered the whole journey.
Yeah. I mean, that's really good to know the end-to-end journey of how things have flown, and how did at each step as a product manager, what were your crucial steps to be taken there. So now, since we are heading towards the end of the podcast, Sudha, we would love to hear any last minute advice for our listeners from your side. Since all majority of our listeners would be aspiring or early career product managers, what would be your advice to them?
I think earlier on, you should join a company which is truly product driven and product management driven. I wouldn't say product driven, but product management driven. By that, what I mean is, see, some hardcore engineering companies, right? They may have a PM function within it, but it's not necessary that it's product management driven, because usually engineers make the call and they just run with it. It depends on the technology also. Some companies, some verticals warrant you need that kind of forcing function. But if you are looking to be a product manager, when you interview, you should actually ask about things like, our product manager is actually heading the strategy for your product. What is your day-to-day work like, right? So initially, at least, I think you should join a company which, if you can, of course, join Amazon, because that's like the gold standard. Not everyone can or wants to join Amazon, right? So, but even the smaller ones, you should do your due diligence and join a company where you actually get to exercise all your PM muscles and you get to learn those skill sets. That is the first. Second is, I would say at least switch every 3 years earlier on in your career, right? Move to different, if not functions, if not companies, sorry, at least your functions, right? At least as a PM, you can go try your hand at sales for a bit. You can, or if you have this, some companies have this, you can actually bungee jump. You can do like a 6 months thing with another and come back, right? You can try your hand at sales, your marketing, your design. All these are aspects that you will use in your product management career if you plan to stick to it, right? So just knowing how these other functions work, it's a huge value add for you. So and switch companies also, because every company has a different, of course, every time you switch, make sure it's still product management driven. But make sure that you have that varied, that's not something that I did, but I did within my company. But I would strongly suggest, because it gives you a little bit of view on how the world outside your comfort zone works, because every time you switch, you have to retrain yourself, you have to learn, and it's always growth. It's always a growing experience. So at least in the first, I would say, first 10 years, go out there and just see what is out there, right? Don't say this is what I'm going to do forever. Probably not, but you should. I think you should get varied experiences. You learn to work with all kinds of people then. It's a very powerful life skill also, actually. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sudha, for being so candid, because a lot of times it happens that people tell you that we stick to one thing or stick to a company, but actually trying your hands out with different verticals and domains makes sense, because in an early career you need to explore everything and understand how different verticals work. So
Okay.
thank you so much for all those amazing insights. This officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope all our listeners have enjoyed our discussion and this has helped learn something new to them also. So stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And this was fun, actually. And all the best to both of you.